Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Phil Menser. I'm in the Center for Complex Networks and Systems Research, and we have about 10 faculty up there, and we do a lot of interesting stuff, but of course we don't have enough time to talk about everything. So I'll be giving a little overview of some of the work that we're doing on the spread of misinformation in social media, and this is work with Sandro Flamini, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I'm gonna get 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes and presenting and presenting the work of the group in this area. So I'm sure you all use social media, and so you find a lot of information there, and a lot of the information that you see there is not quite accurate. So you find things like Obama is a Muslim and vaccines cause autism, or even that here at Indiana University there is a secret conspiracy to spy on citizens, in case you've heard about that. So let me tell you a little bit about our work in detecting different kinds of misinformation, and then some more theoretical work on how misinformation spreads, and finally very early stuff on mitigation. So we have we're building a framework which leverages data that we're getting from Twitter. It's a lot of data, and several students and postdocs are involved in this effort, and we're trying to make this data available for research purposes. And one of the things that we do is we study how information spreads from one person to another. So we look at the structure of networks like these, where nodes are people and edges represent how a piece of information, a picture, an image, a link, or a name spreads from one person to another, for example, through retweets or mentions and so on. And it turns out that the structure of these networks gives us a lot of interesting information when it comes to detection of different kinds of information. So for example, when you look at the network of some normal organic conversation, like when people talk about politics on Twitter, you get pictures like the ones in the top. But then sometimes you see some really weird stuff where you have a small number of nodes with huge edges between them that represents tens of thousands of messages that are exchanged every day between two users. Well, of course, those are not real users. They're bots, and they're designed to deceive. For example, to give the appearance that there is a lot of people talking about something, or that their person is particularly popular, or something like that. And so it is interesting to look at the structure of these networks, and we extract many features that describe the features of these networks, and then use machine learning to try and detect, for example, in this particular case, distinguish between organic conversations from AstroTurf, that is, conversations that are driven by fake accounts that create the appearance of a grassroots campaign. And it turns out that in some cases these techniques can be quite effective. Another example of misinformation that you may have heard about is social bots. So social bots are used for all sorts of things, many good ones, but also some bad ones. In some cases, to scam ratings, to make it look like politicians are more popular than they really are, to make money, for example, by causing some piece of stock to boom or to crash, and then basically perform fraud. And lately, social bots, really dumb social bots, have also been used to rake money from horny people. By the way, these bots, they don't have to work very hard. All they have to do is automatically reply and ask for a credit card number. But you can make a lot of money that way. So we built a framework that leverages not only features about the structure of these networks, but also other things like features about the users, the characteristics, the age, metadata, sentiment characteristics about the content, temporal features, for example, are messages created at regular intervals or not, or are they bursty, and lots of other features, in fact, thousands of them. And then we use them to try to tell whether a particular account is a real human, as in this case, this is a former postdoc in our lab, or a bot. In this case, this is a program designed by some students. And if we have good training data, then this can be kind of a good system. But of course, bots are getting smarter, and so there's a lot of interesting research challenges in this direction. So I'll tell you a very little bit about of some more theoretical work about how misinformation spread. I mentioned earlier that we were actually, our lab became the target of one of these kind of misinformation campaigns. And so, we became not only interested in an academic sense, but also in a very practical sense. And we studied how some piece of misinformation spreads virally in some cases. And so when we started to look at the case of our own, the attack that was happening towards our own research, that was claiming some really crazy stuff. I'm not going to go into that. We started noticing some interesting patterns. For example, not everybody was tweeting and retweeting, even though there were tens of thousands of people, but they tended to come from certain groups rather than other groups. Perhaps in most cases there were people that were predisposed to believe certain things rather than other things. And so it turns out, in fact, that when you look at the structure of communication in social media, especially on topics like politics that can be polarizing, or whether there's contentions or disagreement, you find very clear signatures in the structure of the networks of division between groups, to the point that one group really does not hear what the other group is saying. So these groups or clusters, and they're sometimes called echo chambers, are extremely effective at spreading very, very fast messages within the group, but kind of blocking messages from the other group. And so one then has to ask the question, yeah, social media and the web in general are really good to spread information. Everybody can generate information, everybody can access information. But in reality, does the underlying technology, does it actually favor outcomes like this, perhaps worse polarization? So that's a good question that was captured in a headline like that. For example, does Twitter make our politics worse? So some of the research that we're doing is trying to explore that kind of question. So for example, one way to pose that question is to ask, when we use social media versus when we use some other technology, for example, search engines, are we exposed to a narrower or a broader set of information, or to information from a narrower or broader set of sources? And we can now measure this with some data, traffic data that we collect. And it turns out, in fact, this is a measure of diversity. And it turns out that if you compare, for example, social media and search, in fact, even though we're accessing information from all our friends and we're reading a lot, we're reading probably more than we used to a few years ago, and yet what we're reading is somewhat more narrow in terms of the viewpoints. Some of the work that we're doing is based on analytics, as what I've been showing until now, and some others is based more on modeling. Okay, so we use some agent-based models, which are very simple abstractions of the real world, where we're trying to capture some features, and then we run these models to create theoretical predictions, and then we can compare those predictions with data from the real world. So for example, we might create a simple simulated version of Twitter, where agents are interacting, and then create certain conditions and see what happens. So for example, we use these kind of models to look at whether the structure of the social network favors or hinders the spread of some kinds of misinformation. See, so here, for example, we were looking at whether if you have a segregated group that believes something, let's say a hoax or a conspiracy theory, the fact that they are segregated, separated from the other world, what effect does it have on the spread of that hoax? And so in this plot, you see, for example, that if you have some number of gullible people who are going to believe this kind of misinformation, the fact that they are separated from or segregated from the rest of the network makes it easier for that hoax to survive for a long time and spread faster. There are other conditions in which the opposite is true. So we hope that these models can give us some ideas about possibly informing policymakers or even informing technology. Another kind of thing that we've been studying using these models is to try and understand the role of competition. Like, we are bombarded with so much information, and so how does that harsh competition for attention affect what things go viral, what things we pay attention to? So it turns out that sometimes there are different things that are roughly the same quality, but some go incredibly viral and some don't. And so our model suggests that as long as we are communicating over a network that looks like our social networks, like Facebook and Twitter, it has that kind of structure, and we have limited attention, we can only pay attention to a few things at a time, then it's kind of inevitable that you will have some things that will go viral, even if it's completely uncorrelated from the quality of that information. So then the next question would be, in this kind of setting, what are the conditions under which the best ideas, the more interesting or trustworthy information will win, will go viral, versus other things that are junk? And it turns out that, so here on this y-axis you have the likelihood that the best ideas will win. And the more competition there is, the less that happens. The network becomes less efficient in terms of spreading the good messages versus just noise. And even the structure of the network has an effect. These are more realistic networks than these. And so that's kind of like worrisome news. The networks that we use, almost finished, are not very good at propagating good information. Okay, so 30 seconds. This is some of the stuff that we're just beginning to get involved now to see whether we can use computational models and network science to perform or to start working on the problem of fact-checking. Because misinformation is a serious problem. So we look at a statement and we try to use information that is available from the Wikipedia or other sources to see whether there is support for that kind of statement. And it turns out that very simple measures that we're analyzing now are pretty good at separating things that are true from things that are false. Okay, so so we're doing work on detection, and we're doing work on modeling and theory, and now we're beginning to also work some tools in this area of misinformation. And if you're interested, please come and see us. This is the website of our lab, and you can talk to our great students and postdocs and colleagues and read our papers. Thank you.